Everybody come in. Sorry, I know it's a little bit weird because you're actually on the camera. Hey Andrea, how are you going?
Hey, good. All right, I can hear you guys quite well.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sorry.
Sorry, so this is a very new thing that I've never done before. So this is streaming, streaming to YouTube. So thanks so much for joining us, Andrea. So to give everybody a little bit of a brief introduction to what we're doing, this is NASA Space Apps Melbourne. And joining us here for this chat today is Andrea Boyd. So Andrea is an Australian International Space Station flight controller. And she studied mechatronics at the University of Adelaide. So we're very fond of her in Australia. And Andrea has done some amazing work advocating for an Australian space agency and for a space industry in general. So we've got Andrea for 20 or so minutes tonight to tell us a little bit about her experience in getting into the space sector and what we should be doing in Australia. So Andrea, I'll hand over to you to do a bit of a chat.
All right, so hi guys. Firstly, Space Apps Challenge is amazing, so it's awesome that you're participating in that, and I hope it goes really well. I'm looking forward to seeing the results after. So yeah, I work at the European Astronaut Centre and the Columbus Control Centre doing International Space Station mission control. I've been doing that for about 5.5 years now, and before that I was working in Australia as a control systems engineer. So the path to get here, because we don't have a clear space agency in Australia, was kind of difficult and more self-made, which would be, you'll find the same story from other Australians that work overseas as well. There are recently a lot of really good space startups happening in Australia. So you can look at like Sabre Astronautics, Fleet, for example, Gilmore Space Technologies, the incubator that Troy started now in Melbourne. So there's a lot of really good new stuff that you can get involved in now as well. We still don't have a federal space agency, but we are working on it. Yeah. So I'm happy to take questions about space station, astronauts, astronaut training, different things to get into the industry, or as you like.
Yeah, so we might start with a question from inside the room. But one of the things we are going to try out is taking questions via Twitter using the hashtag MX17. So does anybody have a question to kickstart? Yes, up the back there. So just jump up and speak quite loudly.
Hi, good evening. Could you tell us about your day-to-day life for mission control personnel, essentially?
Yeah, so originally I was in science control, so we'd go on, you have 3 shifts a day, 8-hour shifts running 24 hours, and you do remote control of different payloads from the Science Control Center. And now my role is Eurocom, so I'm the person that talks back to the astronauts when they call down from space. So normally you come on console around 6:30 in the morning or so, set up, talk to our counterparts in Europe and around the world, and then the astronauts' day kickstarts at around 7:30 GMT, and you pretty much just run flat out from there, and you hand over to the afternoon shift, who does more or less the same. So there's set points in the day where the astronauts will call down, partially for parallel ground commanding, things like that, to make it more efficient. And of course, if they have any problems, they can call down as well. And if they have problems, it's usually quite difficult ones, because astronauts are really smart people. So if they can't figure something out and they have to call down for it, then that's where it's kind of really, go in real time. And that's a lot of, well, I want to say fun. It's not at the moment, but yes, it's pretty cool.
Is there any
in arguing for an Australian space agency, how are you going about it? Is it a social benefit, economic benefit? Obviously trying to convince a country that digs holes for money. It's not an easy argument. Is it a let's dig holes on asteroids, or is it something else?
No. No, definitely not the asteroid one. That's a terrible economic argument. Nobody has that business case closed. No, so firstly, caveat, I was a mining engineer for several years, and I really like that as well. I worked at it in near Woomera. But anyway, it's not just myself. There's a core group of people that are working on this since quite a while, and I can't say a lot publicly. You can find a few things published online, but not too much at the moment. But yeah, it is getting a good reception for the first time in a long time. And the arguments are, of course, economic is a huge one, because Australia spends between 17 different departments and agencies who spend a ridiculous amount of money purchasing satellite data from other countries without actually having our own satellites. You could technically count the 2 NBN satellites and the 2 Optus satellites as Australian, but there's nothing Australian about them except that we footed the bill because they're American made, American designed. If anything goes wrong, you've got to ask the American company to look at it and troubleshoot it for us and pay a variant in that as well. So yeah, locally developed ones, we have the new small sats that were just launched for QB50, but they're educational ones. They don't have a very long lifetime, and it's not like a super sustainable thing. But in the future, you could have, you know, as other countries do, you know, just pump out CubeSat constellations and also make our own, you know, microsats and regular sized satellites as well. It's not expensive like it was back in the 60s. So that one of the big hurdles, I have to say, for Australia doing that as well is that our regulation, the Space Activities Act of 1998, is really quite prohibitive, but that underwent a major change last year, and the government approved rewriting that completely. So that obstacle is going to be out the way. So yeah, the arguments are mostly economic, and yeah.
And so there's going to be a lot of Australian participants watching this video at the moment. What sort of areas do you think that some of these challenges might actually turn into commercial small businesses, like Fleet Space that Flavia is doing, like Gilmore Space that's happening up in Queensland, that could complement what an Australian space agency might participate in?
Yeah, so I think for Australia, downstream satellite applications and the utilization of data from various satellites, which is across, you know, a ton of industries. There's I mean, I can't start listing all the applications that you can have for that because there are really a lot. So downstream application of satellite data for different industries, and putting that in an easy to read end user format as well. Yeah, I think that's massive. That's where you get the value add from all your satellite utilization.
What would be the recommendation for everyone in the room if we were to try and advocate to see this happen at a grassroots level? Where should we start, and what should we yell about?
For the Australian Space Agency, yell about what's relevant to you, and please write to the minister. So they are obliged to reply every time you send a letter. Emails maybe as well, but definitely letters they're obliged to reply to. So we've also been getting lots of people to send letters to the Minister of Industry, Innovation and Science to give him more confidence in a good decision to create the Australian Space Agency. So there was a few expats and we put together a website. Actually, it's called Quokka Space. I think, Troy, you've got the link.
I do.
Yeah.
I'll link to that.
On there. Yeah, so on there, there's instructions on how to write to the minister and the address that you can send them letters. And if you send them a letter and write down things that are relevant to you, as well as, you know, looking for future career prospects and how it's good for Australia and all of that, they do pay attention and they will write back. So that helps enormously. If you would be able to do that, that would be excellent. And you can quote things like the space apps that you're involved in right now and the benefits that you can prove during this event too.
And what do you think an Australian Space Agency would look like? Like, would it look like ESA? Would it look like NASA? Could it be a part of ESA? Could you give us some background on that?
So you would need to have headquarters, usually in the capital city, for example, if you're looking at the structure, and then you can have operational centers in different states, perhaps set up similar to the German Space Agency, where they're similar to Australia. They've got a state-based, quite independent state governments, as well as a federal government, and their space agency is in different states. So if a state would like one, they apply to the federal government to have, you know, an operational center of some sort in that city, capital city, and there's a process for that, and it works really well in Germany. So I think that sort of model would fit really well in the federal state system that we have in Australia too. And then definitely, like, international partnerships are really key for the sustainability of any national space agency, because that takes it outside of the political system, and then you suddenly have international consequences. If you've got like a 5-year or a 10-year international agreement in place with other countries, then every 3 years or 4 years when the government changes, they can't just, you know, throw that out because it has bigger links. So that's the key to getting it to survive a change of government, which is really key, because we had 2 almost space agencies in the 80s and in the late 2000s, and they died because they didn't survive change of government.
And so that's, yeah, I guess.
Also, they didn't really have a budget or autonomy or authority or mandates or technical well, no, they had technical competence in the first one, but yeah, the second one was just like admin, which didn't work very well.
And so what
Almost,
do you
but not
think
quite.
this time that we really think this is finally going to be the time that we get that space agency and that central voice for space that we didn't have in the past?
So I think the key things is that government does understand the importance of a space agency and the importance of having Australian satellites and secured access to satellite data, because that's a really big thing. So for example, right now, because we rely on America mostly for satellite data, anytime the American government shuts down, for example, like in 2013 when it shut down for quite a while, we suddenly lose Earth observation monitoring for bushfires, for example, and that was in the middle of bushfire season, which was not great at the time. So that, they're realizing that we do need secured access to telecommunications and remote data from satellites. And yeah, so I think that's a big thing. The other really big thing, of course, is that Australia won host country for the International Astronautical Congress, and that's going to be in September this year, which is a really big deal. And that's the entire country, the entire world, sorry, like coming to Australia, along with, the entire country of Australia together. And that's like all the customers in the world and all the clients and providers and suppliers and agencies and everybody right, in Australia for a week. And that's an amazing opportunity to actually kickstart things there.
Fantastic. Is there any other?
I also recommend that you go as students to that event or as participants if you are interested in that sort of thing as well. It's going to be in Adelaide in the last week of September.
Yeah, so as Moonshot, we're definitely planning on taking some people along. So it could be some of you guys, it could be some of the other Australian Space Apps participants watching. So we have some other
definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, so you mentioned as a large part of your job, you spend a lot of time talking to astronauts. I was wondering how that relationship goes, whether it's quite casual or whether you have you get to know them, or whether it is just still very formal. And if you have any anecdotes
bit of both. Bit of both. I mean, crew time's really precious. So when you're talking on space to ground, we have a lot of shorthand things, a bit like pilots do when they're talking to air traffic control. So we have a lot of our own personal acronyms and our own shorthand and that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's pretty efficient and it's mostly about work stuff. But at the same time, we know all of the astronauts before they launch, so they know who they're talking to on ground, and quite often, they'll say Capcom or Eurocom or whatever, and then they just switch to first name, and we'll add in a few, jokes and other things like that as well, if it's appropriate, and we're not doing super time critical activities. But definitely there's a relationship between the communicators and the astronauts already beforehand, and that works really well for being in space too.
There's another question. Yeah, go ahead.
You've been talking a lot about the Australian Space Agency, but obviously you don't work in Australia at the moment. For people here, perhaps like myself, who want to be working in the space industry, would you suggest we push hard to get the Australian one, or still consider the overseas options like what you've found yourself?
So the overseas options are always going to be there. The space agencies overseas are very, very well established. You can even go to the New Zealand Space Agency. But of course, it would be great if there was an Australian one. So definitely keep pushing for that. Even if you do move overseas, a lot of the expats like myself, we try and keep touch, and when we return back, we try and keep advocating for this as well. Yeah, I mean, Andy Thomas has also been doing that for a really long time.
Is the fact that New Zealand has a space agency an argument for Australia having one?
It's a nice anecdotal argument, but not. Yeah, I may have slipped it into a few casual conversations, but not in official documents.
All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Has there been any medical emergencies, or even just someone having a sore tooth with the astronauts?
No, not on board the station. However, everybody is trained in medical well, they have medical training as well as dentistry training as well before they go up. So astronauts will have medical training and they spend a couple of weeks working in the emergency ward, so they are ready for it. And one of the crew will be the designated medical person, which will be, if there's an actual medical doctor, it'll be them. Otherwise, it'll be the person with the most medical training that does extra specialist medical training as well. But yeah, they all also have dentistry training. So in theory, they could do something if they needed, but we haven't had to use it yet. But we have kits on board if we need.
Could you quickly, just as quickly as possible, go over what it actually takes to become an astronaut? Sorry, it's been a very long day. An astronaut,
Yeah.
particularly if you're an Australian citizen or partial Australian citizen. So I've heard you talk about this before, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. So firstly, I made a flowchart, and it's on the Clock of Space page. So get the link, and you can look through the flowchart. But the citizenship matters. So you would not really have a chance being Japanese or Russian or Chinese or European. But NASA, if you have American citizenship, doesn't consider they consider that as a valid thing in the application. So the best chance for anybody else who's basically the best chance is to gain American citizenship and apply as a NASA astronaut if you're Australian. That's what Paul Scully-Power and Andy Thomas did as well. That's my short summary of it. But yeah, things like having scuba diving, like open water diving license, having a pilot's license, doing lots of extra things outside of studies as well, like team sports and things like that. Being like having a blog, being good at communicating with people, that sort of thing is also a big advantage. Yeah, so there's other things you can do like that to boost your chances too. You should have a really big extracurricular part of your CV.
And multilingual.
But unfortunately, nationality matters. So for Australians, you have to become American. That's my very short summary. But check the flowchart. The flowchart is great.
So links to the flowchart. It's a really good flowchart. We've got a couple of minutes left before Andy has to go do some really important space station stuff. So is there any last questions? Yeah.
I'm just curious about what's going on with the screens behind.
Yeah. So this is the Eurocom control room. We have a couple. So we have one in Cologne, but they still call us Munich. So you're in Munich, even though I'm in Cologne right now. So behind me you have the live feed from the space station, and in the middle you've got the live position of the space station and some other data, and then on the other side it's the satellite coverage that we have and the satellite predictions that we're using, as well as some other real-time data from the space station. And then the middle one with different colors is the timeline of the astronauts for today. It's very, very, very packed. It's called the Optimus timeline, and it's the most efficient, optimized, amazing thing you will ever see in your life. So it has the 6 crew members, 1 line for each, as well as all of the other resources and data and operations and remote controlling and everything that we're doing. And everybody in the world has this at all the mission controls, and the astronauts have it on the space station as well, on their laptops and on their iPads. So we're all extremely synchronized, and it's not just a timeline. If you go into any box on the timeline, then it pulls up also the exact instructions and the activity from the International Procedure Viewer Library as well. So it's a pretty amazing tool, and that's how we run operations day to day on the space station. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm just trying to get my mouse back. So I'll let you get back, because I know you've got some very pressing console work to get back to at the moment. But thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry, we're trying something we've never ever done before tomorrow, and so it's the final prep and a couple of tests that we're doing on board the station today. And yes, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but I'm pretty sure I have 90% confidence we're gonna rock this tomorrow.
No, that's okay. We're doing something we haven't done before as well. We're trying to stream a video. So.
Exactly. You guys know how it is.
They're both very difficult tasks. So, no, thank you so much. It's been fantastic to have you. We're going to have another 3 more talks over the course of the weekend. Sorry, Andy, just going to quickly turn out. We're going to talk to Andrew Aldrin on Sunday morning, who's the son of Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin. We've got John Tucker, who's the manager at SpaceX. And tomorrow morning, we've got a live talk with Richard Tonkin, who is one of the original engineers for the Australis-5 satellite back in 1966. So hopefully this is going to be an interesting series. Hopefully don't have many more technical difficulties. So thank you for everyone watching. And thank you so much again, Angie, and we'll talk very soon. Thanks very much.
Sounds good. Good luck with the weekend, guys.